Startup Grind welcome for Bryan Johnson. Let's hear it. Let's get loud.
That feels like The Price is Right.
That's maybe a better analogy. It's just like The Office, right? Every day when you I talked to somebody, when you walk in, everybody, they do that, they clap, cheer. Well, thanks for being here.
Thanks for inviting me.
You don't get any sort of anxiety when you get to the Silicon Valley, do you, or to the Bay Area?
I love it here.
You do?
I do.
What do you like about it that's different from where you've lived the last 15 years?
Because like one of my favorite things in life is evaluating people's assumption stacks. So that is like the mental models that people create about their understanding, why they spend their time the way they do, what they believe, what they believe. And I find in Silicon Valley that there is thoughtful consideration about what people believe and what they assume to be true in life. And I think oftentimes the reason why so many companies are built in Silicon Valley that break things and that change the way things are is because people are able to see things others cannot. And they do that by challenging what other people believe. And so every time I have a conversation here, I'm eager to hear what they're going to surprise me with in terms of the thought process they present.
Let's start with, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the experiences you had, especially with Braintree, which is a product that we still use and powers all of our ticketing across the world. So thank you for that. I know you're not involved anymore, right? You haven't been for some time, right?
Right, yep.
Yeah. But talk to us just a little bit about, being in Chicago, starting this company. Where did it come from? You had started a number of other companies, and this kind of emerged from that, if I understand it right. Just tell us a little bit about that. What went into the decision of bootstrapping, and just tell us about a little bit about the very early days of Braintree.
Yeah. So I guess I was talking to Derek before this tonight, and my objective in talking is to hopefully share things that are useful to you guys. And so I'll try to extract lessons that I've learned that then you can parse and determine whether or not they're useful in your world. Instead of just trying to tell a story about what my experience may have been. But, so I mean, I guess the origin of Braintree is at the age of 21, I decided that I wanted to retire by the age of 30 because I wanted to spend my life trying to improve the lives of others. And I didn't know what that meant at the age of 21, and so I thought, because I don't know, I'll just make a whole bunch of money, and then with the freedom of time and money, I'll go out and figure it out. And it made total sense to me that that would be the logical conclusion. And so I started Braintree. There's a long story there, but I started Braintree, and I'd done a bunch of other startups, some on my own, others with partners. And one of the things that I loved a lot about entrepreneurship is that I got to author the world I lived in. So I had total freedom to build whatever product we wanted, whatever culture we wanted, to hire people. We got to create this entire world that we lived in. And to have that ability to do what we wanted, when we wanted, and how we wanted was so interesting to me as a human to live life like that. And I would talk to other friends who had taken money from investors or who were co-founders that were fighting and they hated each other. And this idea that we could just build something exceptional was incredibly interesting to me. And so I decided to bootstrap Braintree, and I was a sole founder. And of course, that has drawbacks. Like handling things by yourself is very, very difficult sometimes. But I found that formula worked very well for me in terms of how I wanted to build. And so yeah, I bootstrapped Braintree for almost 5 years. PayPal acquired us a year and 11 months after we took our first round of funding. But it was a fantastic time of my life, one of my favorite in my whole life, because total freedom to build.
And along the way, like, did you ever, I mean, you're seeing all these, Groupon's there, you're seeing all these companies raising absurd amounts of money, right, contemporaries of you. And I just talked to our chapter director in Chicago, and he said, the thing about Bryan in Chicago that's legendary is there were much bigger exits in Chicago, but none of the founders made anywhere near the amount of money that you made. And so I wonder, like, along that way, through those different opportunities, people banging on your door, VCs fighting to try and get you to take their money. Were there inflection points where you said, hey, now, you know what, now's the time, I should just take risk off the table, and just, a year or two in or 3 years in, or like, were there ever points where you just said, hey, you know what, the bootstrapping thing, like, it's just too hard. Like, I need partners. I need to get some gray hairs in here to help me.
Yeah. No, so I think of the 5 or so years, I think we were profitable for something like 56 out of the 60 months. From the day one we were profitable, and we didn't need to raise money. I raised money from Excel just to take money off the table. I had been basically broke my entire life. From my childhood, where my mom made clothes for me, growing up as an entrepreneur, we never ever had money, and so I was broke. And so at the age of 34, I was like, well, I really could use a little money because this whole being broke thing's getting kind of old. And so I was able to.
Plus, you were supposed to retire at 30, so you're
exactly,
feeling like
totally behind.
You blew it.
Yeah, I blew it. And so I took money off the table. I think the round we took, I think it was 26 million, and this was basically like, okay, now I have enough money. I'm done. Like I don't have to work again. Now I can really swing for the fences because Braintree was doing remarkably well. We were killing it. And I knew that we had something big that we were going to do, and so that really helped me psychologically and aim for something different with Braintree.
What was special about building in Chicago versus, could you have built that business in LA? Could you have built that business here? Or was there something particular about Chicago?
No, it just happened to be there. And
you could have done it anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Like I went through this thought process with Kernel, this new a human intelligence company I'm building. We're trying to build a neuroprosthesis. And I think for that company, I looked at LA, San Francisco, New York, and Boston as the viable markets would have critical mass in the people we need to hire. But I think now if I were to build Braintree again, I could probably build it in like 10 markets in the US, 16 markets that I felt like there would be critical mass of engineers and expertise. But I mean, I think for the first 32 employees, I think something like that, not a single person on the team had payments experience, which was interesting. But yeah, I think that basically you can build an exceptional company in a larger number of markets than I think conventional wisdom would suggest.
You have this fund now. You took $100 million of your own money, and you're now investing. You have a team that's supporting you in that, but this fund that you've started. Can you just talk a little bit about that? There's some things that you've done with it that are totally different from anyone that I've ever spoken with or any investors I've met. First of all, you used all your own money, which is almost unheard of. I mean, there's a few examples of people with like multi-billionaires who have created their own funds, but you know, almost everybody takes LPs, they take other investors, they take risk off the table. Why use all your own money? Why not risk somebody else's money this time?
I think the same principle as Braintree, that I wanted to build a fund how I wanted to. I wanted to go out and test what to do and how to do it. And I think we're at a point now where I would consider doing something else because I just want to scale it. We've had great success beyond what I thought was possible. And
this is the fund, or you mean with Kernel?
The fund.
With the fund, okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so I'd like to expand that because $100 million just is not very much money, turns out.
Yeah.
But I think that I do, as an entrepreneur, I place enormous value on methodically and carefully thinking through what I build. And I like to build things a certain way, and that when we hit a certain point, then we can scale it. But I really like to think through because, as you all know, it can get very messy being an entrepreneur, right? With investors and co-founders and the whole team. And messiness really gets to me in terms of I like to live a decently organized life in terms of keeping clean thoughts and structures.
Can you talk about, from the investments that you've made, you're a data junkie, what patterns you're seeing, what types of entrepreneurs you actually are investing in, what you like versus what you don't like? Can you just talk to us about it?
Yes, there's a couple attributes I like in entrepreneurs. One is I think that if you look at the story of humanity, we are at this incredibly unique time in that we just came upon the first time in history where we can literally author any kind of world that we can imagine. So if you take the technologies like synthetic biology, genomics, computer software, virtual reality, augmented reality, we can program anything. So previous generations was stuck basically coming up with stories like this is what you can become in this great storyline, right? And now we deal with the reality of what we can actually build. And so when I look at entrepreneurs that I want to invest in, I look at their future literacy, which I define as creating mental models for the emerging future while living experimentally and adventurously, who understand the general rhythms of what our future could look like and deal with those tools of creation. And so I've made a lot of investments in synthetic biology and in genomics in these areas because I think they're akin to like the printing press, where if you have this platform of creation, then what you expect to come, you just have no idea. Who would have expected the books that people would have written when the printing press came out, and it took a while for that curve to happen, but the same is true with genomics and synthetic biology. While we're programming fragrances and flavors and things like that with synthetic biology, what's around the corner is probably beyond a lot of our imaginations.
And what size of deals are you typically doing, and do you lead those? Do you do the whole thing? Do you share with people, or are you syndicating? Like, what do you do?
Yeah, we've done seed, A, B, we syndicate, yeah.
Okay.
I just want to get the job done. I would like these companies to succeed.
Let's talk about Kernel. What is Kernel?
Yeah, so Kernel is a human intelligence company, and we are trying to build the world's first neural prosthesis for cognitive repair and improvement. And so I arrived at this company because, again, back at the age of 21, I wanted to figure out what I could do that would benefit humanity. And so if you pull yourself back 1 million miles from Earth and you look at planet Earth and you say, what will become of us on planet Earth? I think the most important factor is intelligence, that we've never had the ability to increase our intelligence in the way we do today. And so we've always worked on intelligence. For example, we had stones, and then we built more sophisticated things like thermostats, where it took over part of our decision control. Then we have calculators, and now we have AI. So our tools are becoming increasingly sophisticated in what they can do for us. But humans, like, we're just as smart as we were 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. We just have smarter tools. But humans, relative to our other tools of intelligence, is a landlocked island of potential. And so the idea behind Kernel is that we can find a way to not only repair cognitive function in neurodegenerative diseases and help people live more fulfilling lives, mental vibrancy, but we can also create an entry point for which we can actually work on our own intelligence.
I mean, these issues affect everyone, right? I mean, I think the stat is that 1 in 9 people are affected with either dementia or Alzheimer's or, you know, some other neurological disease. I mean, who's doing this well right now? Who do you think, if you say, hey, I'm impressed by what they're doing, you know, who's solving this problem in a good way at this point, or who's making progress on it? Because it's a big deal.
It's mostly in academia right now where this research exists. And to my knowledge, we're the first company working on this. There are people who are working on Parkinson's using deep brain stimulation and things like that, but we, I think, are the first company working on actual specific neurological code for these types of things. And it's a brand new area, and we honestly don't know what to expect. There's all kinds of things we need to figure out. But to me, it's a worthy endeavor. I mean, for example, like, our life expectancy is increasing. Right? Our body, we're getting better at living longer, but what does it matter if our minds aren't vibrant? No one wants to live in a state of mental decline.
Yeah, I was just last week, I was out on my sidewalk, and this woman walked by, and she said, this is a true story. She said, hey, can you help me? This man's following me. And I recognized her. I've seen her, at community functions, and I look at the guy, and he's like, I'm her caretaker. She has dementia. And I think everybody in here can probably relate to somebody, whether it's your grandfather, your grandmother having Alzheimer's, or something. I mean, my grandparents did. So, I mean, it's one of those things. It seems. I mean, who wouldn't want to solve that? We all want to solve it. It's probably a very lucrative market, I would think. A huge market. Is this science fiction though? I mean, can this happen, or is this hypothesis and hey, we'll see how it goes? I mean, yeah. What is your take? At this point, is it still a hypothesis at this point, and you see what happens?
I think the data, without getting into details, I think the data is sufficiently compelling to warrant my time and attention. And I think that all of us have the same question, is we all have the same scarcity of time, and we get to decide what we do with our time. And we all have a certain cost associated monetarily and otherwise. And I think that this is the most worthwhile endeavor I could personally pursue. Succeed or fail.
Do you see this as being like the last thing you work on, or that's too big to even think about? Like, when you say that, that makes it sound like, hey, this is it. I'm going to do this, and then I am going to officially retire. But is that how you look at it? Is like this is the last company I'll start, or no?
No, I mean, I think I believe the purpose of the game is not to win; it's to play indefinitely. To borrow from James Cars.
Talk to us a little bit about the team you have working on this. Is it a big team? Is it still small? Is it and you're self-funding it, I guess, right? Yeah, a big team, Small team?
I think we have about 15 now.
Okay, great. And is this something, will you bootstrap this as well, or is this something that, hey, you need to really get people involved and get other partners at some point?
So building a medical device...
It's going to be expensive.
I mean, so it's roughly, if you look at comparables in the market, it's taken most companies between 10 and 15 years and 150 to 200 million. It's expensive. And so, but those have been pioneers in this industry, and I think there's ways we could potentially shortcut that. But then again, I think that's probably naive for me to assume that we could shortcut it, so I probably have to assume timescales that are longer than I anticipate and a lot more money than I'd also anticipate.
When an entrepreneur asks you whether or not they should start something, or when they should know that if they should start something, tell us about, take us through that thinking process. What do you tell an entrepreneur like that?
I've actually given this a lot of thought, and I think I have an answer that's useful. So the equation I think of is force is greater than resistance. And so if you dissect that and you consider what you have in terms of force, right? You have personal will and tenaciousness, resourcefulness, your intelligence, skill sets. You may have $100 in the bank, right? You have these things you can bring to the table. And resistance, right, is you have equations like things will probably take 5 times longer than you think. You're probably going to have a fight with your co-founder and a falling out, right? Like all the things that encounter startups. Your product probably isn't going to work. You're probably going to lose customers, or probably, all those things. And so just dissecting the thought process of figuring out if you really have the force to overcome what's going to happen in the resistance. And so every day when I think about myself, I try to anticipate the resistance I'm going to encounter, and I try to mentally accumulate the amount of force that would overcome all those resistance factors. And so to me, it's becoming a working model of how I anticipate life.
So in terms of like solving problems, or you started Braintree basically out of a problem that you saw through some of these other businesses and the things that you were doing. Do you find that, how critical is that to solving your own problems versus like, like startups, entrepreneurship, these things are all part of popular culture now, right? And you have Zuckerberg today met with the Pope, which I thought was kind of funny. Like, why is Mark meeting with the Pope? But it's great. I'm happy for him. He gave him a model of one of their planes, which that was a very thoughtful gift. But what, like, when you see entrepreneurs and you're talking to them, like, I want to start a company, I want to be an entrepreneur, I want to be my own boss. And I know as I had that thinking, as I was coming out of college, thinking like, that's the scenario I want to set up for. It's very different than like, hey, I want to solve a real problem, which you have to kind of discover. You need to become a domain expert. You need to be very thoughtful about. Where do you see that bridge, or where do you see that line of entrepreneurs saying, hey, I just want to do it, versus, hey, I have something really important actually to do?
Yeah. So on the Zuckerberg meeting with the Pope thing, I think it's interesting that if you look at history of society and who in society became meaning makers, who decided what we should care about, what rules we should follow, what's worth doing, this thing over that thing. And CEOs now are becoming meaning makers in society. They're creating models that all of us use potentially. And so, for example, like if I sign up for a vegan diet, every time I interact with food, I'm going to process that food through my mental model of, should I feel good about this food? Right? Do I eat this food or do I not eat this food? And then also I'm going to spit out an emotion. Should I feel good about this food, or should I feel shame and guilt about this food? And so these mental models rule our lives, and it's true in business, right? In economics, in religion, in governance, in our social models. Like there's a certain way for me to behave in this room right now. If I violate those social norms, right, there's triggers. And so Zuckerberg and others have raised their hand to say they're going to create mental models for society on how to influence, just outside of a Facebook platform. And so I think it's really interesting that entrepreneurs building stuff here are now engaged in activities that other people in previous generations were not, and specifically meaning making and mental models the world will consume on how we decide what we want to become.
I mean, Steve Case talks about this in his latest book, where he calls it the 3 Ps, the things that entrepreneurs need. One of those is basically this ability to navigate policy and to get in with people that are controlling large aspects of the world and make a difference with that, whether you're Uber, whether you're self-driving cars, some of the things you're doing. You've got to find those people. You've got to play in those games, and if you want to change the world, you need to work within the confines of some of the things that already exist, and then create your own version of that as well.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
But on that, Derek, like I think like one of the most incredible opportunities in the world right now, which I'm really interested in this being solved, is we've had this big change in society where we now have these technological tools to create any kind of world we can imagine, right? We can program genetics and synthetic biology and everything around us, right? But the ideological frameworks we've inherited from history suggest we do certain things and we build certain things. And sometimes there's a disconnect. So where is the framework that people like raise their hand and say, like, hell yeah, like we can build anything we want, right? And like that's my new place where I'm going. And it's like starting to build a little bit. But if you look at the landscape of the world, I think there's this huge disconnect between what we can actually do and what these assumption stacks and meaning making tell us we should do, or right, the path we should follow.
Don't you think though that some of these assumption stacks, like some of them are in there for good reason, right? Or are they just all wrong? I mean, do we need to reinvent everything? Is everything, like I look at some of these things and I think like, you know, I say, hey, there's some of them there's probably good reason for it, and some of them there aren't. But, you know, does everything need to be reinvented?
Right.
Does it? And you're saying
right.
You're saying basically of every aspect of life. So does it?
Okay, so I would say,
are there any lessons from the past that we should, you know, that we should not reinvent?
So let me ask you this question then.
Yeah.
What is history but a continuous stream of reality changes just when we think we have it all figured out? So every generation has always maintained this belief, like, now we got it, right? Like, the earth is round and now we revolve around the sun, like we think we've figured all this stuff out. And then something else comes and just changes our whole reality. It's like, what things have stuck throughout the history of humanity that have not been changed?
I think a lot of the things that make us happy are still the same things that made us happy from the beginning. Whether that's, you know, whether that's taking care of your kids, whether that's, you know, joy that you receive in professional improvement, whether that's, you know, working hard, things like, I mean, some of those kind of foundations of different aspects of life. Eating, for some people. I think people have always enjoyed eating at some level. Maybe not as much as they do today. But, yeah, I don't know. Is that, you tell me.
So, I mean, I think you can find some constants, right, in how humans are wired. But I generally think that we are predisposed to think that somehow in our modern age, we have an edge on all of humanity, that somehow we have it figured out.
Sure.
And I guess what I question is, do we? And if history is any example, we can fully expect that most of our world that we've constructed will be challenged in fundamental ways. That'd be my supposition.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Let's take some questions from the audience.
So you talked about basically wanting to retire and work on a problem that would really solve something big for the world. So I was thinking about that on one side of the spectrum, and now you're at a point where you're working on augmenting intelligence, neurological diseases, you know, simulating and creating an interface to neurons and that kind of stuff. So that's like a far more specific problem than kind of your initial problem statement. Can you kind of talk about, and I'm sure this was a big journey, but kind of like some of the questions that you went through personally to go from, I want to do something that has a huge impact, to maybe the immediate question after that was, human intelligence hasn't changed in a really long time.
Yeah.
All the way down to, oh, right now there's this really interesting impact that I could have on this part of that problem.
Yeah, so I went through this exercise when I sold Braintree. I had this question of, like, what do I do with myself now? I've finally reached my goal, and I can now choose any problem in the world to tackle. And so I wanted to figure out so what I did is I started calling the most talented people I knew who are working on really audacious things. And I would ask them a series of questions, like, why are you working on what you're working on? Like, what are the thought processes that led to your conclusion that this was the thing that demanded your attention? Right? And I walked through, I don't know, maybe like to 200 people or so. And I wanted to see, like, the landscape of, like, how are people thinking in the world? Like, why do they choose what they're doing? And a lot of people stumble into stuff, and a lot of people are deliberate. They had an itch, like they wanted to do something, or just a personal passion. And my assumption when I started this process was intelligence was the answer. Like I thought that that is the singular thing that determines the outcome of humanity. Everything lives downstream from intelligence, everything. It's the master tool. And so after going through this process, I became more convinced that intelligence was the worthwhile thing to work on. And so that was just my case, right? But other people differ in the outcome of what they want to work on and why. And they're legitimate reasons. I'm not suggesting that mine trumps everything. I'm just saying from my perspective, that's what I concluded on. And I thought it was well-reasoned. But that's not to say that other people can come to different conclusions, and it's just as well reasoned. But I think it's an important question that we all would be worth. I think it's worth us examining. Is why do we spend our time doing what we do? Like we live in this unbelievably wonderful time where we have this security and freedom, and you guys have all these talents. You can work at any company you want, really, right? And why do you do what you do? It's a really interesting question.
Hi. It's very fascinating to hear that you invest in companies in AI and biomedicine and neuroscience. I'm just curious about how far you think ahead. How much do you believe in solving death, like some other entrepreneurs talk about? Do you have any thoughts on this?
So I guess I really like to live. I like living a lot. And like tomorrow, I've got really fun stuff I'm doing. And I bet you tomorrow night, I'm going to be just as excited about Thursday. What's today? Wednesday, right? And so I don't know if I'm ever going to get to a time in my life where I say, you know what, like today, I've kind of done everything I want, and tomorrow I don't have anything I'm looking forward to. And so at the same time, I do want to feel healthy, and I want to feel like I'm in a good state. If I have mental decline or my body's not working correctly, then I think it's a very challenged situation. And so I love the idea that we are working on solutions that help our bodies be healthy. I love the idea we have the potential of helping mental decline. And so I think we may get into a situation in humanity where people say, yeah, I feel really good. And tomorrow I think is going to be a great day. But I think trying to tackle this like living forever and immortality, it's just the wrong frame. I don't necessarily subscribe to that frame. I would like to try to improve the quality of life, and then we explore the future as it comes to us. That'd be my take.
So this will be a nice segue off of that. What routines or practices do you have that you think really optimize your performance and focus and clarity?
So at the age of 23, I got diagnosed with hypothyroidism. And so I did a blood test, and I got my results back from my doctor, and I got this 2-page list of all my stuff. And I looked at the sheet, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. All this data from my body is unbelievable. And so I've been monitoring my blood for every 3 months or so for the past 14 years. And it's become this great game where I do all kinds of stuff for my health. And I just went through Human Longevity's Health Nucleus, where they sequenced my whole genome, my metabiome, did a whole body MRI, brain MRI. They did 20, 30 other tests. And so I find it to be a very fun game. And physically, I feel amazing. I have so much energy, and so I find it to be a lot of fun. And I hope that as we make progress, that I can continue to feel this good throughout life. That I won't have to experience the decline that we would expect through other generations.
Thanks for coming out. One practical question, one strategy question. Did you find doing an MBA useful, or you thought those years could have been used better?
I have such a mixed reaction to that. I don't know. So I guess generally speaking, I always found the data transfer rate in school to be slow. So in high school, I grew up in a public school in a rural area in Utah, and I felt like the connection in class, the data was like a 56K connection. I could hear the squeaking, like it was just so slow, and I wanted a gig of data, like just feed it to me, and I could process it. And so I always got bored of school because I just couldn't get the data rate transfer rate. But then I remember in business school, I had this experience where the very first case study we had was like two people trying to build a new golf ball, and they had a whole bunch of IP problem, and it had taken them 2 years, and they were trying to overcome these manufacturer problems. And we had a couple questions we had to answer as a group, and I was with I had 4 people in my group, 4 more people in the group, and we talked about the questions they had. And we went around and asked, and like they all made their comments like, yeah, I know this IP landscape and strategy and how you do game theory, all that kind of stuff. And when it came to me, I was like, I'm worried about the founders. Like, can they pay their bills? Are their marriages still intact? Like, how's their emotional state? Are they depressed? Like, are they sleeping at night? Like, my brain was so differently wired than everyone else. And so when we got into statistics and corporate strategy, and I don't know, I guess I valued on-the-street learning more so than anything else, and I do appreciate what I learned I appreciate how Chicago taught me how to think. But in terms of like walking into an institution, I don't know, I have mixed emotions about it, whether or not that was a good time. And I didn't go full-time, it was always executive. Like, I never thought school was a full-time job. I wanted to build a company and go to schools, but, you know.
And then in making the decision to found Braintree and the other companies that you founded, I'm at exactly that situation. I just graduated. I really want to create a lot of value in the world and elevate people's quality of life. And I'm making the decision between, do I build a news company that like make me a bunch of money, do it later, creating a lot of value, or like build Kernel now? So why decide to wait to build Kernel and do something else in the meantime? You could have built a lot of progress. Yeah. Why that decision?
Yeah, I mean, it was easy for me. Like, one, I had no skills, and two, I didn't know what to do. So you may be very different. Like, you may have skills and you know what to do, which would be awesome. But I just didn't know what to do. Yeah.
Just go ahead, Nick. I'll just ask without a mic. If you had more time, what would you do? And checked out your website. I think you do a great job of like keeping it very real, and you talk about like personal struggles you were going through before Braintree. Love for you to touch upon that and like just like step out of Bryan today, like step into Bryan like pre-Braintree in that phase when you were traveling the world and trying to figure things out and failing. And what was your thought process then, and what did you learn having gone through that as you look back in hindsight?
I'm sorry, I missed your entire second question. Your first question was so good, I got lost in thought. And I'm sorry, like, well, I'm sorry, what's your second question?
Just if you could share some reflections on like, this is Bryan today. Like before that, I think on your website, you lay out how you were going through some personal struggles and you were like starting a few companies, didn't work out, and you were trying to figure things out, and it was not like the peak of your life as you would remember it. And so if you step out of Bryan today and step into Bryan like at that time, like what are things you would tell yourself looking back in time?
Yeah, okay. I'll take the second question first. So on a personal note, when I decided at 21 I wanted to retire by 30, and never in my wildest dreams would I have guessed how hard that would be, ever. And I gave a talk in Chicago like 3 years ago, and I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, and I told a personal story with all the raw details of my personal struggles. And I broke down and cried for 2 minutes in the middle of the talk. I totally lost my composure. And I didn't know what to think about it, because prior to me, speakers were like, here's the 5 ways to do SEO. And, and here's me crying. But something remarkable happened after I did that, and I'd say half the people in the room came up and hugged me. And they said, I am you, and you are me. And like the hurt of being human is real. And the difficulty of building companies is real. And there's power in talking about the struggles that we face. And we put on happy faces and come to events like this and we shake hands, but then we go home and sometimes it hurts really badly, and sometimes the pain is so intense we don't feel like we can get up one more time. And we think that we are alone in this case, and it's not true. And so what I would have told myself at 24 is that the difficulties I had a young family. I was dead broke. I had failed businesses. I had struggles at home. I had chronic depression. And this persisted for a decade plus. And the intensity of what I felt when I laid in my bed at Sunday night and I questioned whether I had the ability to get up the next day, right? Hundreds of times to do it again. And then to get beat back down again and again. And I probably would have said to myself, you are not alone, that the things you're feeling are real and that others are feeling them too. And you would probably do well by being more vulnerable and open with your struggles and to find camaraderie with others who are going through the same stuff, because it's empowering to be open and raw and vulnerable. And I think it's something we have in our society that somehow talking about this stuff or revealing it somehow makes us weak, or that we're somehow a lesser of a human, but it's not true. I think it's embracing the beauty of being human and the struggles we have. And so I would replay that game because I was silent for the whole time. I didn't tell anybody what I was going through. And that was tough.
Let's give a big round of applause for Bryan. Thanks for coming.